we are living in a time that is so overwhelmingly exhausting for the average person just to survive, that if we're only going into marginalized communities, whether you're talking about the queer community or any other marginalized communities, if you're only going into marginalized communities when you're asking them for your vote, or when you're asking them to canvass, or when you're asking them to volunteer, or for their money, I don't think that that's a productive way to create change.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hi, I'm Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status Coup News. I am here with Kanan, who is a gay rights, trans rights activist in Orange County. We are at the Bernie Sanders rally, waiting for Bernie Sanders to come on stage. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the things that have been happening in Huntington Beach, California. Not because they're local, but because I think that this is like sort of happening everywhere in the country in smaller towns across the nation. So you have a city council that is very much right-wing, very much MAGA-oriented. Huntington Beach has always had right-wing extremists that have lived there for many years. Many of the Capitol insurrectionists spent time in Huntington Beach in the years running up to that. So you're sort of in that hotspot of activity. Can you walk us through some of the things you folks are doing to try to change the course of where we're at right now?
Absolutely, and I would agree with you that the city council they identify themselves as a MAGA council. They've got a Trump bust on the dais during city council meetings sometimes.
Wait, hang on. They have a Donald Trump bust on the dais?
They do. They have a white bust of Donald Trump that sits on the dais sometimes, which is interesting.
I'm going to say it. I think that's kind of culty.
It's, I wouldn't disagree. But yeah, so they identify themselves, specifically with Trump and MAGA. It is an extremely partisan council. I think part of the problem that we're having in Huntington Beach is it's a microcosm of what's happening across the country right now, which is there is more focus on culture war issues that do impact marginalized people in a negative way than there is focus on actual productive governance. When the city council budget is floundering and in the red, but we're talking about trans people in sanctuary cities, I think that is a negative impact to everybody, even if you don't belong to a marginalized community. And I think there's a lot of people across this country who are seeing that not just in their hometowns, but also in state-level governments and in national governments. And that's not sustainable.
You make an interesting point. So it's almost as if the culture wars, right? Well, we're talking about the culture wars that got brought into, I would say, the government 15 years ago and have just been increasing, are being used as a smokescreen almost for the extreme right, like maybe a narco-capitalist, guys like Peter Thiel, whatnot, very wealthy individuals, not just Elon Musk, right? To extract more wealth, and that does affect, quote-unquote, poor white folks as well. So what do you do to fix that?
Yeah, I can speak to Orange County. According to the last U.S. Census in 2021, about 8% of the population in Orange County identifies as LGBTQ, and that's self-identified, right? So they may be higher than that. That should be a voting bloc, that's one of the big reasons that Pride of the Pier was formed, was we realized that we have enough people in this community that if they are educated and connected and empowered to get involved in local politics, we should be able to shift the conversation into a more productive way, because 8% of the population should not be an easy political football, right? Again, when you're talking about budgetary problems, when you're talking about potholes not being filled, when you're talking about, your average, local government corruption, on any level, on any side of the aisle, we shouldn't be having conversations about trans athletes, right? So the hope for us is that if we can, like I said, connect, educate, and empower the community to actually be involved and get their voice out there, and not just voting, but going to city council meetings, engaging with their representatives, paying attention to school board meetings, getting onto boards and commissions, in being not just a participant, but being a leader in local government. The hope is that in 10, 15 years, it'll be political suicide to go after trans people in Orange County.
Right. That makes sense. Huntington Beach has had in the past Nazi rallies. When I say Nazi rallies, I'm not just saying Nazis, they're all Nazis. I'm talking people with swastika tattoos, just so the audience knows I actually mean Nazi when I say Nazi.
They consider themselves Nazis.
Yeah. Self-identified Nazis with swastika tattoos. I filmed guys with swastika tattoos in Huntington Beach. So my question is like, I feel like those guys are a lost cause. Their racism, their hatred are what drive their politics. There is a very active club. Active clubs are where, after Robert Rundo, that's sort of where the new next generation of neo-Nazi is going. And I know they targeted you in their Telegram room because I saw the posts. But so excluding those guys, there's some like sort of kind of quote unquote more normal Trump supporters that are just maybe old school Republican, not paying attention. But let me ask you this, because at one of these rallies, a couple of guys showed up wearing swastika armbands, which at one point they removed, but the Trump people there saw it, and they all decided to stay. They didn't leave. They didn't chase these guys away either. They just kind of went, and let them stay. To me, that's like, well, you might as well be at a Nazi rally then, right? So what about those folks, these normies that are sort of just accepting it and normalizing it?
Yeah, I think there is absolutely something to be said about, if you are in a space and you are allowing Nazis, if you're allowing white supremacists, if you're allowing, open and proud hate to have a part of your conversation, that's really something that should be considered, which is part of the reason that, I have a take that I suppose is maybe a little controversial in Orange County, which is that I think that we should stop spending so much energy trying to convince the average Trump voter. I think we have put so much energy into trying to pull folks on the far right back to the middle, that there are a lot of people who are on the left who have felt completely left out of the conversation. And even more importantly, I think there's a lot of people, in fact, maybe the majority of people in this community that don't talk about politics, who don't pay attention to politics, because they're too busy trying to pay for their food. They're too busy trying to get their kids into childcare. They're too busy trying to figure out, how do I lost my job because of all these cuts. How do I get a new job, right? We are living in a time that is so overwhelmingly exhausting for the average person just to survive, that if we're only going into marginalized communities, whether you're talking about the queer community or any other marginalized communities, if you're only going into marginalized communities when you're asking them for your vote, or when you're asking them to canvass, or when you're asking them to volunteer, or for their money, I don't think that that's a productive way to create change. And so, I'm not a politician. I'm not a political consultant. Nobody's asking me my opinion. But as an individual,
but you know what? They should be. They should be, because you are more on spot on with what you're saying right now than any of these consultants are, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. I need a job. But no, for real, I think that's why a lot of the work that the org that I work with is doing it's not partisan. We're not trying to get folks to register for one party or the other. We just want to figure out, what do you need, right? After the election last year, we had a town hall, like a virtual town hall, and for registration, we asked a whole bunch of people, basically, what do you need? And all of the answers, we got close to 100 answers, and all the answers that we got from the queer community were safety, education, community, and something to do. And so we have formed our 2025 plans for the organization around those four things, right? I wish that we had more people who were leading political campaigns, who were having conversations like the ones we're having here. I wish more people were focusing on asking the marginalized communities that they just assume will vote for them, asking them, what do you need? rather than going, oh, well, we know that the trans people are going to vote for us because they're not going to vote for the other side. We're not going to pay attention to them. Let's pay attention to the people who voted for Trump. Like, I don't think that that's productive.
All right, Kanan, I agree with you. I think you're 100% spot on. They assume that what they call their firewall is going to maintain, and which is really messed up in my opinion. Those are your base. You should be listening to them. Also, the other part of the conversation is the biggest chunk of voters in this country are the non-voters. Why are they not going after bringing the non-voters into the Democratic Party? In my opinion, the analysis is clear on this. The GOP voters that are going to vote for a Democrat, they don't exist. And every time the Democratic Party tries to bring those folks into the voting booths, they don't bring them in, and they end up dampening the excitement on the left. The left stays home and doesn't vote, and that is how they lose elections every damn time. It's how they lost this one, in my opinion. There was no major shift to the right. Both sides had fewer voters, but the Democratic Party had much, much fewer voters than the Republican side did. And I think this is part of the conversation. So related to that, you now have some like sort of mainstream Dems, corporate Dems, like whatever you want to call that group, that are basically saying the reason Harris lost was because they were trying to placate the left. I think that's nonsense, but they want to start throwing, trans folks under the bus. They want to start ignoring the left and say, no, we got to move more to the right. I think this is another big mistake. It's coming from consultants, not from the grassroots. What do we do about getting the Democratic Party to stop listening to consultants that don't know what they're talking about?
Oh, man, now that's a big question. I think my thought is that you would imagine after losing over and over and over again, they might want to reconsider, but it's not working so far. I think...
so the question, is that by design?
Maybe. It's possible. I think that this is where I think there is a lot of value in us elevating third parties. Now, the conversation about third-party voting when you're talking about presidential elections, it's a complex one, and people have been arguing about that for decades. But we are not. Today is April? What's today's date? The 12th. The 12th.
It's Passover.
There you go. It's Passover. It is April 12th, 2025. Right? Yeah. We are nowhere near midterms. We're nowhere near a presidential election. Right? At this point in time, we should be talking to the Democratic Socialists of America. We should be talking to the Green Party. We should be talking to the Peace and Freedom Party, right? We should be talking to these smaller parties and parties that aren't even groups that aren't even official parties who are on ballots, but are just non-partisan groups. I think the more focus that we can give to these smaller groups in the time where we have the ability to have the conversation without the pressure of a presidential election or a midterm election, I'd like to see more people elevating those smaller groups, because realistically, we live in a two-party system. There's nothing that's going to change that anytime soon. But the more that we can elevate groups, like voices on the left that aren't the Democrats, I think it's more likely that the Democrats will see, hey, we're losing people. We need to start, why are we having people leaving our party and going to other parties?
Which has already been happening. We interviewed Working Families Party individual earlier today. They're talking about working within the system of the Democratic Party to push folks left. You also have Progressive Democrats of America that are trying to do that. But I think what you're talking about more interestingly is coalition building, right? So there might be times when, at a local election, when the Green Party guy is the best candidate, we have a semi-open primary system here where you're going to end up with two Democrats on the ballot, where there's no threat of handing votes to the Republicans if you run somebody that's too far to the left. That's just not logical, in California at least. So there are spaces for that, and then maybe at the presidential level, you get everybody to get together and say, hey, we got to rally around one candidate if we want to win. So that actually is logical to me, but that seems to fall on deaf ears across the board, and you've got a lot of people that should be working together on these issues fighting with each other.
Yeah, and that's, I think, coalition building is exactly what it is, right? And I think even among the smaller parties, there can be a tendency to, I don't want to work with the Peace and Freedom Party, or I don't want to work with the Green Party. And this is where, I run an organization in Orange County called Pride of the Peer. And obviously I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on their behalf, but we are a nonprofit, so we're nonpartisan. So in our coalition building, we work with, we were given an award by the Orange County Young Democrats for our work, but we also work with the Orange County Democratic Socialists of America. We work with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We work with the... That's okay. He was focused. We work with the Orange County Communists. And we also work with a lot of groups that aren't parties, right? So we work with Fiat Rainbow of Orange County. We work with gender affirming professionals, obviously the LGBT Center, all the local prides. And this is where I think I saw a comic recently, which I think sums up what I'd like to see everybody do on an individual level. It was one person saying like, "Oh, we don't have any community. There's no community here," and somebody pops into frame and they go, you can hold a party, you can invite people, you can do that, you can build community. So it's like if you're an individual who is struggling to find community in your space, start. You can start, right? Like 3 people is a community, right? Pride of the Peer, we started 2 years ago, and we were 5 people on the end of the pier with our regular size pride flags, and now we're an actual nonprofit we're close to 5,000 followers on Instagram. We have monthly events. Like, we have people who come to us as a resource, and we didn't know what we're doing. We didn't have any money, right? We still don't have any money. Please donate. But like that kind of coalition building, I think it's not as difficult as people think it is. And I do think that it is the solution to the problem that we're in. Even if, here's the thing about coalition building. Even if the political situation that we're in right now continues, even if things get worse, which I think they will, coalition building is how we survive. So, and that's the other half of it, right? Is that if you are more focused on this is my other complaint about the Democratic Party, I think if you are more focused on winning the next election than you are on making sure that the people you serve are taken care of, like, that's not a balance that can be sustained. So if we are working on building communities, building like proper mutual aid, building like cross-community bridges, that's how we're going to get through this.
All right, so let me ask you this.
That's a lot.
No, it's not a lot. This is a really great in-depth interview. Let me ask you this. Let me reverse and ask you a local question before I get to this one. This is a build-up to my final question. We've had our governor, who is, I think, going to run for president, Gavin Newsom, started a podcast a few months ago. I think this has gotten national attention for good reasons, right? His first guest on the podcast was Charlie Kirk, who is somebody who is absolutely 100% funded by very wealthy dark money, who has been working on shifting the Overton window to the far right for a very long time. I would argue that he has made a lot of anti-Semitic statements, even though he's pro-Israel. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Some people think they are, they're not. Then he went on to have, worse, Steve Bannon, who is 100% an architect of the far right, of Donald Trump being in office. He had him on, and neither of these episodes was he particularly argumentative with these folks on. He wasn't holding them accountable for anything. So my personal opinion here, I'm giving you my personal opinion, I think this is political suicide. I think he miscalculated. I think in his mind, he's like, I'm going to run for president. I'm going to reach out. But all he's done is normalize extremism and pissed off all his base. What are your thoughts?
I think Gavin Newsom lost my vote when he did that. I will never vote for him for president or for any other election ever again. And I have voted for him in the past. I think that he probably got advice from political consultants.
Yeah. We're back around again on Yeah, those damn consultants.
And that's the thing, right? It's this idea that, oh, the country is moving right, I'm going to move right too. Not the country is moving right in a well-funded, calculated, decades-long effort to move it right.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I can to push it back because I owe the people who got me here.
That's right.
And
Kanan, that's the thing, right? Let me say this. The country has not shifted to right. This is the conversation in the media has shifted right. The people winning elections has shifted right. But the majority of the people that live in the United States of America have not. They are choosing not to vote because in their mind, there's no difference between candidate A and B. Now, I would argue there 100% is, but we're going to table that for now. But I think that what you're saying is correct for that reason.
yeah, and that's the... If our answer to watching the rise of actual fascism in this country, and I'm not going to equivocate on that, that's what we're seeing. If our answer to the rise of fascism is to hand over the people who are the earliest targets, like that's not a way that we get through this. And until the Democrats learn to stop, letting the steamroller, come over marginalized people in order to extend the amount of time that they can be in power. Until they learn that that's not acceptable, they're going to continue to lose.
Indeed. And I'm going to, in fact, because we're at a Bernie Sanders rally, I'm going to go back to 2016 for a second because I think this was a flashpoint for how we got here. There were a lot of voters that came out to support Bernie Sanders that didn't go along and continue into the Democratic Party. They just chose not to. And that, to me, was a missed opportunity for the Democrats. And in response to that, you see a lot of them being like, well, they're not Democrats anyway. Oh, well, who cares what they think? Like, you see these obnoxious opinions, and you're like, are you trying to lose elections? I don't understand how you could be so intractable when at the end of the day, these are people that agree with your platform. They should be an easy shoo-in for you. If you want to win elections, listen to them. Why are the consulting class not getting that? Is it they're paid not to? They're making money off not to? Because I can't believe they're blind to this. I don't believe that.
I think we have watched over the last 15, even 20 years, we have watched Republican lawmakers watch some of their base shift further and further to the right, and they have gone, okay, that's what my base wants. That's what works with my base. Not even that's what my base wants, but like that's what can get my base to vote for me. I'm going to shift. And the Democrats, not all of them, but I think there's a trend that a lot of Democrats in power have done kind of the opposite. Instead of saying, oh, I have a base of followers who wants healthcare to be covered by the government, right? Who wants to make sure that trans people are legally protected? Who wants to make sure that, there's accountability for police brutality? Like, these are not very controversial points, honestly.
They shouldn't be, yeah.
And their response to people shifting out of the party has been the opposite of what the Republicans have done, right? The Republicans took, there was a point where there was a point where the Tea Party was fringe, right? And the GOP leadership shifted to match the fringe. And the Democrats, watching so many people leave their party because they're not being represented or they feel they're not being represented, the fact that their response to it is, no, I'm going to stay right here. I think that's, if you're not, but if you're not paying attention to the average person on the street, and honestly, the demographic that the Democrats are, stereotypically serving versus the demographic that Republicans are typically serving stereotypically should not be different demographics, right? The policies that a lot of people who are here at a Bernie rally today, the policies that we're asking for would also be helpful to the average person living in rural Arkansas. And I don't know why the party seems to think that that's such a tough sell.
Right. I don't either. It doesn't make sense. All right, so this is my last and final question. What happens next? So, here we are at a rally. We have musicians. We've got some local politicians speaking. And then we have Neil Young. We got to mention Neil Young, of course. But then we have AOC and Bernie Sanders doing their speeches. what happens next? How do you galvanize people to do something, and what is the something they should be doing to change the trajectory on? Because we are facing fascism. I think we are there. I don't think that's an exaggeration.
I'm going to talk directly to the camera for this one. So if you are someone who is going to a rally or going to a protest, that is an opportunity for you to meet people and to network and to find ways to take action. If you are going to a rally and you are just mobilizing and getting there, and you're not going beyond that point to get involved with the organizers, nothing's going to change. There's a lot of people. I went to the Women's March, and I didn't get involved really at that point, and I could have done a lot of good in the meantime, right? If we're only going to rallies and protests and then going home and not doing anything else, this is going to be as effective as the Women's March was, which is to say, not very effective. So go to your rallies, go to your protests, meet people, exchange numbers, find groups to follow. I've already talked to like 6 different groups here who are like, hey, we need your help with this. We need your help with this. Can you sign this petition? Can you get involved with us doing this? Find those people, get involved. And like, Kwame Ture talked about this, right? The Black civil rights leader, organizing versus mobilizing. Mobilizing is about a moment, it's about an event. Organizing is about changing the system. We need to change the system, and that takes action every day, not just today.
Kanan, thank you so much for talking with us. It was a really informative interview. Where can people find your socials?
Well, I don't give out my personal anymore because I got doxxed by Nazis.
Yeah.
But the org that I work with is called Pride at the Pier, and we're on pretty much every social media except for Twitter. And we're also at prideatthepier.org. We're a queer political advocacy group in Orange County, and we're trying to change the political landscape and make it safer for queer people.